I've got good news. They pushed the IRS filing date until May 17th. Yay! The bad news, Grandpa Joe is now going to raise your taxes for new spending jags that haven't even been invented. We are $2 trillion in the red already this year, and that's before you include the latest $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. When Joe and co. finish torturing high-income earners, they're going to push up the corporate tax rate another 8%, grift off a plumped-up estate tax, and pilfer your capital gains. Now, this will help bring in just a little over $2 trillion over 10 years. That's a decade that doesn't even begin to cover a third of what has already been purloined over the last year. So what does raising taxes do to an already overburdened economy? Best case scenario, it's a sucker punch in the shorts. There's a reason we haven't had a big tax hike since 1993. And if it were popular then, Newt Gingrich and his Republican mandate would never have been a bee in the Clinton bonnet. No matter what President Picklebrain and Janet Yellen try to sell, tax hikes are wildly unpopular for everyone. It doesn't matter what do-gooder program they're trying to sell. It is never worth taking home less money so the federal government can pad its own pockets with redundant and ineffective programs. Both parties have completely lost touch with their heroes. Reagan famously lowered taxes on the wealthiest. W lowered the top rate from 39.6 to 35%. And even Presidents Obama and Clinton knocked back Uncle Sam a peg or two to spur much-needed economic growth. Republicans and Democrats have adopted devil-may-care high spending habits. And for Democrats, the need is a downright addiction. Right now, no one wants to really shrink the size of the federal government because promises and dependency equal power. The Tax Policy Center forecasts this revenue wedgie will lower GDP about 0.8%, will kill 159,000 jobs, reduce wages as corporations cope with higher tax bills, all that on the heels of COVID recovery. That could put more businesses out of business for good. Axioms are true if unpopular, and there was never a greater, more necessary truth than this. If you want economic growth, you have to cut taxes and you have to cut spending. You can pretend this is Sweden, but sadly, you've arrived in Venezuela. And that's the memo. President Biden says Republicans can jump in a lake for all he cares. He doesn't care. He'll get all the Democrat votes he needs for those big tax plans. Watch.
How are you going to get a Republican vote for a tax increase?
Oh, I may not get but I'll get the Democratic votes for a tax increase. If we just took the tax rate back to what it was when Bush was president, top rate paid 39.6% in federal taxes, that would raise $230 billion.
Man, that's too much. You're already taking enough money. Stop it. Stop spending money. So will this tax plan kill the economy just as it's starting to pick up steam again? Joining me to break it all down, president of the American Institute for Economic Research and Trinity College professor of economics, Ed Stringham is here. Hi, Ed.
Hi, Kennedy. Good to see you.
So let's talk a little bit just about the corporate tax rate, because the Trump tax cuts lowered it from 28 to 21%. President Biden wants to bump it back up to 28. What does that in itself do to the economy?
So taxing business, including corporations, discourages economic activity. We compete globally with companies around the world, and the last thing that America should be doing is punishing American business. Oftentimes they view it as like, hey, we're going to tax the rich. It's the big corporations. But guess what? Corporations hire Americans. They hire workers. We also purchase things from them. So at the end of the day, taxing American business is a tax on the average worker, the average investor as well. So it's not as if we're just going to be passing off to a few rich people. This is going to be discouraging economic activity nationwide.
And it's the big companies like Target and Amazon. They never fall victim to these tax laws. You know, corporations don't just mean Walmart. You know, these are mom and pop shops, and Biden's talking about closing off some of the deductions that pass-through corporations enjoy in order to offset their personal risk when they are the ones who fund their own businesses.
Yeah, in many cases, those are just small individuals, certainly. So the idea is like, oh, we're going to target the rich. They're going to just pay for all of this spending. Well, first of all, the rich, even though they have a lot of money, there's only so much money. They don't have $2 trillion to pay for this latest bailout. And so there's a spending problem, and then following that with a tax problem that's always been unpopular among Americans. The interesting thing is over the past 70 years, even with all the different tax rates, the federal government's never been able to tax more than 20% of GDP, indicating that Americans are very good at finding ways to reduce their personal burden. And so the only thing that higher tax rates are going to do is just going to be harming the people who can't hire these big fancy accountants.
And that's what rich people do. And that's what they will continue to do. And this idea that you're going to soak the rich and pay for everything. I mean, you know, let's leave the COVID stuff aside. They have their eyes on some huge spending programs, including infrastructure, which is always popular with Republicans, even though they should privatize everything.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. They're out of control spenders. That's the major problem. And then figuring out, OK, now what are we going to do? How are we going to pay for this? And, you know, increasing the capital gains tax, a terrible idea. That's one area where economists have shown very clearly you increase capital gains taxes, people simply just invest in other countries. And it shows the data. Yeah, the data shows that increasing capital gains taxes actually decreases capital gains tax revenue. So it's totally counterproductive to be trying to squeeze our already difficult economy, squeeze it even more.
That's why I invest in crypto. Ed Stringham, thank you so much.